On Truthout TV, it's about juvenile prisons, the incarceration of kids, and what you can do to stop the cycle of profiting from imprisonment. I'm Ted Asregadoo, and my guest is Victoria Law. She is a writer, a photographer, and a mother. And she's penned a news analysis on truthout.org called Closing Cages. People Power helps stop youth incarceration. Hi, Victoria. Welcome to Truthout TV.
Thanks for having me.
So you pose a question at the beginning of your piece with this question. You basically say there is a decline in the number of young people in jail. However, there are more jails being built. Now, why are these jails necessary? That's your question. So what did you find?
I found that actually these jails aren't necessary. Research has shown that, youth crime is on the decline, and that also it makes more sense to put money into programs that either keep youth out of jails and prisons to begin with, or if they do commit crimes, to sentence them to alternatives to incarceration that are closer to home, closer to their families, and provide them with the support needed to basically be able to be in their communities safely and, without breaking the law, than it does to separate them from their families and communities and send them to prisons, which are often located far away from where their families are.
So once you sever that connection with community and with family, it is seen as not as a rehabilitative process, but rather it could, in a sense, reinforce that sense of isolation, that sense of you're now being tracked into the prison culture and there's no way to break out of that.
Yes, and also it decreases the sense that you are part of a community and a larger community for which you have accountability. So you don't necessarily feel that you shouldn't do things that would harm your community or the people in your community if you feel like you've been severed from them.
So you're finding that, in a sense, that when you have those communal reinforcements, sort of divorced from the prison system, it's much more nurturing and, in a sense, much more rehabilitative than what prisons, and especially youth prisons as well, do now within the structures of what they're tasked to do.
Yes. In Illinois actually launched an initiative called Redeploy Illinois several years ago, in which they gave counties financial incentives to develop alternatives to incarceration that would keep youth closer to home and in their communities rather than sending them away from their families and communities. And the number of youth who were sent to prison plummeted. The number of youth that committed new crimes plummeted. And even youth who did not successfully complete the terms of their alternatives to incarceration, who's, slipped up and maybe failed a drug test or did something else, were found to have a lesser rate of committing a new crime or committing a new offense than youth who had been sentenced to prison. So even those who were not, quote unquote, successful at completing the program still got something out of it and probably will go on to not, engage in a life of crime or get caught up into a cycle in which you feel that the only things you can do are criminalized actions.
And a lot of this, in your piece, centers on money, funding. They're funding jails over education. Some communities are. Some are closing recreation centers. These are institutions that are designed to lift people up and not necessarily lock them away. You focus on a part of Baltimore that is sort of a hotbed of this fight, about this tussle, about where are our priorities. Could you illuminate on that? Just highlight that a little bit more.
So in Baltimore, in I believe it was 2005 or 2006, the then Maryland governor Bob Ehrlich said that he was going to fund the planning of a new Baltimore youth jail. So basically, it would be a jail that would cost the state $104 million to house juveniles who were arrested and charged as adults, because currently the juveniles are being held in adult prisons, which is not ideal. I'm not defending, having juveniles or youth in adult prisons, but rather than looking at why are we charging so many youth as adults, what are, the implications for this, and why do we have at least 28 crimes in which youth are automatically charged as adults and they have to go to court and able to have these charges reduced to youth offenses. Why are we doing this? They instead proposed building a $104 million youth jail that would house more than the 50 or so youth who are currently being charged as adults. So I think the number was something like being able to house 200 youth. So in a sense, it basically expands the number of youth you can incarcerate, without actually addressing any of the underlying issues. At the same time, the state was not funding schools. It was cutting funding for recreation programs and after-school programs, and programs that would basically keep youth from entering any sort of like cycles of violence or crime or illegal activity. So the more that you cut programs that youth can actually participate in, the more you're forcing youth that don't have any resources or whose families and neighborhoods don't have any resources into a more of a street culture and a street life.
Yeah, and it kind of gets to one of the underlying themes that to me was implicit in your article, but when I read it, it was explicit. And when you talk about funding priorities and defunding priorities, and you talk about education and rec centers, the institutions that are designed to lift people up, and promoting institutions with money, basically building them with that sort of field of dreams mentality. If they build it, they will come. Mm-hmm. But you also have to defund something else for they, meaning the young people, to be populated with that prison. But this is affecting primarily inner city African American youth. To me, this is explicitly institutional racism because they are targeting through the priorities of funding, building prisons, and incarcerating youth. Who does it overwhelmingly affect? Well, it is African American youth, and that to me is just explicitly institutional racism.
Oh, most definitely. And in Baltimore, actually, a study of youth who were charged as adults in Baltimore City, which is an overwhelmingly African American city, it found that an African American youth in Maryland is far more likely to be charged and convicted as an adult than a white youth. So here we again have like the discretion of or the racism in like who gets charged as an adult versus who gets charged as a child. And if you are charged as a youth rather than as an adult, you have access to services such as mental health services, like counseling, any, like drug treatment if you need it, as opposed to if you're charged as an adult, you are sent to the youth wing of an adult prison to languish there while your case makes its way through the courts, and you are petitioning to be seen and charged as a juvenile rather than as an adult. But in the meantime, you're not getting any educational services. You're not getting any mental health services. You're not getting any counseling. You're not getting any of the things that you would get if you were charged as a youth. So again, we can kind of see how, in this case, Maryland and plenty of other places are funneling youth of color into the criminal justice system at a much faster rate than they are white youth.
Yeah, again, it gets down to maybe the priorities of the prison system.
Yes.
As an adult. It's not about rehabilitation; it's about punishment.
Yes.
Activism is about many things. It's about addressing root causes to problems and trying to solve them through either petitioning our government, getting people aware, a whole host of things. Now, when last year in 2012, there was a pretty, effective viral campaign called Coney 2012, and that was the viral video campaign that was promoting and trying to get young people active in pressuring not only their government locally or state or federal, but also the world government to do something to try to capture Joseph Kony and to address the problem of these poor children who were devastated, their families ripped apart by this, essentially a terrorist. We have in this country an incredible connection of networked, we're just networked very, very, very well, whether it's through Facebook, whether it's through Twitter, whether it's through Skype, like we're recording this call right now. Are there groups that have taken up the cause of youth imprisonment and have tried to expand that network beyond the people that are being affected by this?
I'm not saying that there aren't. I'm not aware of, like groups that are trying to form national networks. Part of the reason why I wrote that article is because I was really inspired by the organizing that had happened in Baltimore to stop the $104 million youth jail that over and over and over, youth advocates and others had been told, this is a done deal, you can't stop it. And it took years for them to stop it. And then to look at Seattle, in which, King County, which is, where Seattle is proposing building, a quote unquote children and family justice center, which would cost millions of dollars. And again, the activists and the advocates are being told there that this is a done deal. So to try to connect these kind of struggles and to look at what's going on, so that way people in Seattle can learn from what happened in Baltimore. What did they do in Baltimore that worked? What is translatable to what, Seattle culture is like, and what, the Seattle political landscape looks like. What lessons could they learn? What lessons can they learn not to do so they don't repeat any of the same mistakes? But as far as I know, there's not, and I could be wrong, there's not necessarily like an overarching network of groups doing work to stop the building of new youth jails or to close down existing youth prisons. It seems like people are operating where they are, which is super important, but there haven't been, a vast number of networks being made specifically around this issue.
I think that probably is the next step, because your article ends with, in a sense, asking, we need to connect the dots here, not only with the activists understanding the problem that it expands beyond their community, but understanding the connection between people who lobby, who profit off of the building of prisons, and they lobby their government to award contracts so they can make millions and millions of dollars off essentially the imprisonment of, in the case of what your article is the focus of, the imprisonment of African American youth.
Yes.
And beyond. And this is something that will spiral in a way that you have to wonder, where are our priorities as a country? Instead, we're funding things that are designed to lock people away. And that's the wrong way to go.
Yes.
And I think your article is incredibly powerful, and it really does highlight something that is very key. And activists and just people that in general that are interested in the direction our country is going need to read this and need to understand that there is a way that you can network with people. And as you said, there aren't any networks that are necessarily being formed because of what's going on in Baltimore and Seattle, but that doesn't necessarily stop anybody from doing it at this point.
Yes. And also I think it's really important to look at what everybody is doing in their different states. Like when I first had when I first read about Baltimore and I found out about Seattle, I had no idea that Illinois had a program called Redeploy, which drastically reduced the number of youth being sent to prisons, which then laid the groundwork for advocates to go to the governor and argue that since the youth prisons were being underutilized, they should be shut down, so that there is not a reason to refill them at some future point. But again, it was made very explicit that this is because of years of organizing, and pushing for these alternatives to incarceration, so that way when the time came to say, we need to cut something, they could say, you're not using these youth prisons, there's not a reason for them to stay open, and hopefully then you won't pass new laws in the future that would send more youth to these prisons to fill them.
Well, Victoria, a very powerful piece, and I want to thank you for being on Truthout TV.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, absolutely. You can read Victoria's piece on truthout.org, and don't keep it a secret. Make sure you share it with friends and family members. And that's it for Truthout TV. I'm Ted Asregadoo. Thanks so much for watching.